The sticky jumper is the greatest weapon in TF2. Look, I checked, it says it here on the wiki. I wouldn't make this up. In this video, we're going to talk about everything you need to know about the sticky jumper. We're going to be looking at a bit of the history, go through some interesting tips for you, but most importantly, we're going to try and answer this one fundamental question: is it viable? And the answer? Yeah, maybe, nah, probably not. To start with, let's take a look at some of the pros we have. Mobility. That's it. But we're talking some real nice juicy mobility. We're talking fastest class in the game mobility, followed closely by, I suppose, a really god tier rocket jumping soldier. What other item in TF2 can you do this with? Get halfway across the map in bad water in an instance. It takes Demo just about 3 seconds to do this jump. To traverse this same distance as a scout, it takes approximately 12 seconds. Even as a soldier who is amazing with rocket jumping? Well, unfortunately I lost the timings for this one, but it's quite quick, but not as quick. That's the main point. The downsides, however, are that you're sacrificing about 2/3 of your damage, as well as, of course, your traps and area denial, which means you've got to ask yourself one question. Does the extra damage I gain by getting to the front lines quickly and making use of positioning and mobility make up for the damage I lose by not having any stickies? Probably not. But as always, it's situational. And this weapon of course relies heavily on you being able to hit grenades consistently. I've always said in the past, if you want to get good at hitting pipes, equip the sticky jumper, because it kind of forces you to do exactly that. In terms of the maps that this weapon is suited to, when I went through my most played game modes, surprisingly, to me at least, I found that this weapon works really well with the majority of Koth maps, probably due to the fact that by nature they tend to have a fairly large area around the point and a very deathmatchy vibe. It also works quite well on CTF, as long as you don't plan on picking up the intel. But then again, who does? Looking at payload though, on some of the more choky maps, it's a little bit more difficult to get value from the sticky jumper. That being said, there are 1 or 2 payload maps that this weapon really excels on. Bad Water and Upward are 2 good examples that come to mind. Although there's very often a section of the map where switching off is probably wise, for example pushing the last point on Upward. Some of the other general advantages and disadvantages: scouts probably become a bit less of a concern when using this weapon, simply because you're moving about so much. However, you do have to be a little bit more careful perhaps of snipers, especially good ones who might be able to pick you out of the air. Also, medics, it's worth noting that sticky jumping demos do not make a great pocket, as they tend to be a bit restless. The one moment within a game that I would say that the sticky jumper certainly does get value is right at this point here, the start of a payload match. You can do some insane flanks and get some crazy angles to pressure the enemies and really mess them up. And also, it's a bit of a cheesy tactic, but you can jump straight to the enemy's tele exit and take it out, which is huge value for your team and will often be enough to allow your team to break a hold. On top of this, attacking NG nests from different angles can also make it easier to take out in general, as the engineer themselves will often be bracing for an attack from a certain direction. You can of course even go and take out the teleporter entrance as well. This can be quite easy, but could be considered an even cheesier tactic, so it's one I personally avoid. And finally of course, using the sticky jumper is amazing for chasing down low enemies and finishing them off, and doing this is much easier than trying to snipe them with a cheeky sticky bomb. Here are the stats. This one's quite important. So I just wanted to briefly go through a little bit of the history, some of the stuff that I think is more interesting. So the reason this gun exists in the first place is that it allows people to practice sticky jumping. It's as simple as that. It's not necessarily designed to be viable or balanced in the traditional sense. That's the reason it has 8 shots in its clip and an arm time for each sticky, because these stats replicate the sticky bomb launcher. A couple of key dates for you. It was added to the game in 2010 when it looked like this. In 2013 they nerfed it so that you can only put down 2 stickies to jump with. Again, this is to replicate the sticky bomb launcher, where even using 2 stickies is a bit of a push. In 2016 they changed the model to look like this as part of the Meet Your Match update, and this was to make it more obvious and clear when the weapon was equipped. Although I have to say, to this day some skins still make me look twice. It was at this point that the iconic triangular sign was added to the gun, and while making this video, I learned that this triangle shape is based off an American slow-moving vehicle sign, which I'm sure you agree is somewhat ironic considering you can fly around the map like a bullet with this thing. A few other stats: the ammo count for this weapon is triple that of the sticky bomb launcher, which I feel is a little bit unnecessary. When equipped, you are unable to carry the Intel, the Australian briefcase, or the pastime jack. And finally, it is not banned in 6s or Highlander. However, it is pretty much never used in 6s at a high level at least, and I've never seen it used in Highlander either, but I wouldn't be surprised if it has been at some point. A quick note on the sticky jumper versus the rocket jumper. Why is it that the sticky jumper is borderline viable, whereas the rocket jumper is a meme weapon reserved purely for the trollger? Well, this is simply because the demo man has two primary weapons, which is something that I think Valve accidentally added to the game a while back, but luckily nobody noticed. The grenade launcher can of course hold its own as a primary weapon in terms of damage output. As I said, as long as you can reliably hit your shots. You can take down two 200 HP targets per clip, whereas a soldier with his shotgun, well, you may as well put on a bit more weight and go Fat Scout. So here are 5 quick tips that are useful if you want to start trying out this weapon. First of all, it sounds silly, but use it. You must squeeze all the value that you can from this weapon. You can't just roll out to mid and then forget all about it. You need to have a completely different playstyle. The super mobile, flying, flanky pipe man thing. As I said, you have to make up for the loss of damage and your loss of stickies by being in the fight more and creating better opportunities during the fight to deal more damage to better targets. If there is any break in play, put one down ready to use. This will give you more options if, for example, you need to escape a situation or suddenly relocate. Try to have one at your feet whenever possible, especially in open areas. If you're heading out into an open area, say through a shuttered door, no matter what your plan is next, pop a sticky down before that door opens, and like I said, this will give you options. Also, when you are jumping around, try to put your next sticky down in midair so the arm time is already depleted when you land and you can continue moving more quickly. Stay as low as possible. When you first start sticky jumping, you tend to get way more height than is needed. Try to stay low when jumping, and remember, you don't have to use the floor. Try using walls whenever possible to avoid getting too much height when traversing the map. This is mainly to avoid fall damage, but can also be useful to avoid sniper sightlines. Occasionally, the horizontal pogo can be useful to traverse some low areas or corridors, and of course in some situations, slopes can be used to surf to somewhat maintain your momentum. A common pattern in your play with this weapon is to go super aggressive, use your clip up, and then jump out again to reload. Make sure you are moving around and repositioning constantly so the enemy just can't pin you down. You can be very survivable with this weapon. Keep moving, going in, shooting, getting out, reloading, and you'll be a real nuisance to try and kill. When possible, try to avoid starting your jump going in the same direction that you want to end up going in. Try walking one way, then starting your jump and mid-air turning around, strafing back to where you want to end up. This will make you way more difficult to predict and will often buy you valuable seconds to get out of a, I'm not going to say sticky, difficult situation. This applies heavily to the situation where the enemy team is pushing you back. If you retreat where they expect you to go, you're going to take a lot of damage. If you try going towards the enemy, then putting your sticky down and jumping and turning mid-air, or the moment you jump, like I said, this will be really unexpected and may just gain you valuable seconds. A few bonus little tips at the end here. Use 2 stickies when rolling out, you may as well. Wait for downtime to reload, you don't always have to have 8 stickies in your clip. Don't take level 1 teleporters. And finally, jump backwards because it's kind of fun. As a filthy casual, this weapon meets my number 1 criteria. It's fun as heck. It's opened up a whole new way to play demo for me, to such an extent that the sticky jumper demo could almost be considered a subclass in the same way that the demo knight is. A subclass that I would like to call Demo Flight. Okay, we don't have to, that's fine. This weapon essentially gives you the ability to teleport around the map, in not a dissimilar way to Reaper from Overwatch. In certain situations, in pubs, I think the weapon can make the demo man even better at taking out sentry guns and NG nests, and maybe even will make you better in certain deathmatch scenarios too, depending on the terrain, the environment, the situation, the enemy, a million factors. But in terms of taking out NG nests, this is kind of your job as a demo man, and I would argue that in many cases it does actually make that job slightly easier. You're able to find a really good angle from which the sentry is more vulnerable, and you can really take the NG by surprise. And it certainly allows you to be a real nuisance to snipers and medics or low enemies or anyone else who's trying to avoid the front lines. But the fact of the matter is that you are sacrificing a huge amount of damage output, as well as your traps and area denial, which means that this weapon in any serious setting is simply probably not viable. And that's why we don't see it very often in competitive games. Traps and area denial alone are just too darn valuable, and too much of a core aspect of the demo man's toolkit to sacrifice. So if you had to pick one for the entirety of a match, then the safe option would probably be the sticky bomb launcher. But this begs the question, what changes would there have to be to make the sticky jumper a worthy contender to stock? Now I know Valve are probably going to rework lots of TF2 weapons right after they release the heavy update and fix comp and fix the VAC system and stuff like that, so we may as well go ahead and think about this question. I have to reiterate though, I don't think that the weapon should be balanced in this way, because as I mentioned before, it's purely intended for practice purposes and it kinda needs to replicate stock for that reason. But just for fun, what about giving it no arm time perhaps? No fall damage when equipped? It really is a tricky one, and I'd love to hear your suggestions in the comments below. Another option would be to perhaps allow players to cap the intel, but maybe they can't use it when they're holding the intel. Of course, this would only impact one game mode, but still, food for thought. After all, the thermal thrusters provide massive mobility, and you can still cap the intel with those. Anyway, whatever your opinion, this little orange tube of sticky stuff, scratch that. This beautiful little weapon, intended purely for practice, has a whole lot to give and is so much fun to use. I'm still learning to this day new tricks, new ways of using it, and I'm so pleased that not only is this weapon in the game, but that you guys hate sticky spam so much that you forced me to start using it permanently. Thank you for that.
Sticky Jumper gets the GLaDOS stamp of approval. Oh, and make sure you smash like and subscribe to Toofty.